In the dim archives of a forgotten Soviet institute, a sealed envelope bears the faded stamp of 1969, contents classified, author silenced. Inside lies the suppressed transcript of Viktor Veynik, the thermophysicist who dared map the unseen layers of reality. What revelations did he uncover that made his work not just burned, but erased from history? This is the story of a mind that pierced the veil between worlds, only to find his truths too dangerous to survive. Viktor Veynik was no fringe thinker. He was a doctor of technical sciences, a pillar of Soviet thermophysics in the late 1960s, lecturing in the rigid halls of institutions like Ivanovo Medical University's microbiology department. Born into the materialist dogma of the USSR, he built his career on the iron laws of heat, energy, and entropy, unyielding principles that left no room for the mystical. Yet, by 1977, when he stood before that seminar audience, Veynik was already a man haunted. His early manuscripts on subtle worlds, elaborate theories positing layered dimensions beyond the physical, had been ordered destroyed on September 19, 1969, by the chairman of the Council of Ministers of the Belarusian SSR. Libraries purged, copies incinerated. Colleagues whispered that he was fortunate it was pages, not people, going up in flames. Veynik himself quipped back with Giordano Bruno's defiance, "To burn does not mean to refute." Why the suppression? In an era when the state equated science with atheism, Veynik's ideas blurred the lines, suggesting consciousness itself transcended the material, challenging the very foundations of Marxist ideology. Overlooked for decades amid the chaos of perestroika and the Soviet collapse, these fragments resurfaced only recently, pieced together from smuggled notes and eyewitness accounts. What began as a quest for thermodynamic anomalies evolved into something far more profound, forcing Veynik to confront the fragility of his own worldview. The core of Veynik's revelation struck like a seismic shift in his personal cosmos. It happened not in a lab, but in a sterile hospital ward in the early 1970s, a chance encounter that upended his certainties. As a convinced atheist, he had long ridiculed notions of a creator or any spiritual overlay on science, dismissing them as relics of superstition. But there, amid the beeps of monitors and the weight of impending loss, he witnessed something inexplicable. A patient's brush with what seemed like the threshold of death, where perceptions defied the chronometric bounds of space and time. This wasn't mere hallucination. It was a glimpse into the subtle realms Veynik had theorized but never believed could touch the human soul. Emerging from that room, he confided to a trusted aide, captured in a hidden recording now unearthed, that his equations no longer sufficed. The subtle worlds were not abstract constructs. They were intimately woven with consciousness, a bridge where the mind could venture beyond the body. "I mocked the faithful," he later reflected in a suppressed journal entry. "But now I see. These layers are not fantasies. They pulse with the very essence of what we are." This hospital epiphany marked his pivot, not to blind faith, but to a reconciled materialism that allowed for hidden dimensions, where consciousness operated unbound by physics as we know it. From this anchor, Veynik's philosophy expanded into a labyrinth of psychological intrigue, probing the existential chasm between life and oblivion. He envisioned the universe not as a flat plane, but as nested spheres, our macro world of tangible matter, the micro realm of particles, and then the veiled subtle tiers, the submicron, pico, femto, and atto scales, where entities exist smeared across time, defying linear causality. Consciousness, he argued, was the key, a phenomenon rooted in these subtle domains, allowing it to pierce our reality like a signal from another frequency. In seminar notes reconstructed from attendee recollections, Veynik described how this explained the mind's enigmas, telepathic echoes, distant healings, even the chaotic eruptions of poltergeist activity, which he framed not as ghosts, but as inadvertent leaks from the subtle into the physical, triggered by those attuned enough to probe the divide. UFO sightings, too, fit his model, anomalous craft harnessing chronal distortions from these hidden layers, evading our sensors because they danced outside our temporal grid. Yet the deeper tension lay in what this meant for the self. Veynik wrestled with philosophical doubts that kept him awake through the Soviet nights. If consciousness transcends space-time, What illusions of control do we cling to in the face of death? His unpublished manuscripts, fragments of which survived in private hands, delved into the psyche's fragility, how the ego, tethered to the macro world, recoils from the subtle's infinity, breeding fear of the unknown. He questioned reality itself. Were our perceptions mere shadows cast by higher realms? And in suppressing his work, had the state buried not just science, but humanity's path to self-understanding? As the Iron Curtain frayed in the 1980s, Veynik's inquiries grew bolder, circling the ultimate taboo, the afterlife not as myth, but as a persistent echo of consciousness. In a speculative passage from a lost 1985 letter to a fellow researcher, rediscovered in declassified files, he pondered a new layer aligned with his thermal metaphors. Perhaps, upon bodily dissolution, awareness doesn't extinguish, but dissipates like heat into the subtle voids, reforming in atemporal patterns. This thermal echo of the soul, as he termed it, suggested death as a phase transition, consciousness dispersing yet enduring, accessible through disciplined mental attunement, much like entropy redistributes energy without true loss. It was a hypothesis born of his hospital revelation, untested but haunting, an invitation to view mortality not as endpoint, but as reconfiguration in the unseen. What if Viktor Veynik's burned pages held the key to unlocking our own hidden potentials, or the warning that some truths are suppressed for a reason? As the echoes of his seminar fade into the archives, one question lingers. In a world still divided by what we can measure and what we fear to know, whose reality are we truly living? In the shadowed vaults of Soviet archives, long sealed after the Union's collapse, a forgotten cassette tape gathers dust, recorded in 1977 during a clandestine seminar in Moscow. It captures the voice of Viktor Veynik, a pioneering physicist whose radical theories on the subtle worlds beyond our reality were branded heretical and buried. Why was this interview suppressed? What forbidden insights into consciousness and the afterlife did Veynik uncover that threatened the iron grip of orthodox science? This is the lost transcript of a man who peered into the veil and paid the price. Viktor Veynik was no ordinary scientist. Born in the early 20th century, he spent decades in the USSR's secretive labs from 1969 to 1992, probing the invisible layers of existence through experiments on chronal fields and anomalous energies. A brilliant mind trained in quantum mechanics, Veynik developed a framework linking UFO phenomena to ethereal realms, not extraterrestrial ships, but manifestations from a subtle world of pico and ultra-thin dimensions. His work, blending physics with metaphysics, was dismissed as pseudoscience by the Kremlin-backed academies. Seminars were monitored, notes confiscated, and by the early 1990s, as the Soviet era crumbled, Veynik's unpublished manuscripts vanished into classified files. Overlooked amid the chaos of perestroika, these documents resurfaced only recently, revealing a thinker whose doubts about reality evolved into profound revelations on death and the soul, ideas too dangerous to surface during his lifetime. At the heart of Veynik's suppressed research lay a core revelation. The subtle world isn't a distant cosmos, but an intertwined realm of consciousness that bleeds into our own. He claimed that unidentified flying objects, far from being advanced alien craft, harnessed chronal phenomena from this hidden domain, thrustless engines drawing on energies that defy our physics. Yet, lingering in places where these entities appeared were residual chronal fields, invisible residues that could sicken or kill the unwary. "I've seen it myself," Veynik confided in that 1977 recording, his voice steady but laced with urgency. Prolonged exposure warps the body, as if the veil thins and something toxic seeps through. But this was no tale of benevolent visitors. Veynik suspected a deeper deception. These phenomena, he argued, masked a lure, tempting humanity into an endless chase for technological dominance, diverting us from the true nature of existence. In his experiments, using sensitive detectors, he measured charges in these anomalies, positive fields fostering harmony, negative ones sowing discord. UFO sightings and poltergeist activity? Both negative, he insisted, echoes of malevolent forces masquerading as progress. As the years wore on, Veynik's inquiries deepened into psychological and existential territory, unraveling the fabric of human consciousness. In 1992, during a routine medical examination in a drab Leningrad hospital ward, fate intervened. Sharing the room was an ailing, elderly priest, his frail form radiating an inexplicable serenity amid battles with lung cancer. As Veynik expounded on his theories, subtle objects as carriers of unseen energies, the priest countered with tales of divine struggle, forces of light and darkness vying for the human soul. A spark ignited. "It hit me like a chronal surge," Veynik later reconstructed in a hidden journal entry. "These were my subtle entities, positive and negative charges, not abstract particles, but archetypal forces shaping our inner worlds." Rushing to the Bible, he found uncanny parallels. Souls as benevolent presences, spirits divided into good and evil, their influences measurable in the fields he'd quantified. Icons and consecrated spaces emitted positive chronal signatures, while hauntings and apparitions pulsed negative. Proof, he believed, that reality's undercurrents were not mechanical, but profoundly conscious. This encounter shattered Veynik's earlier atheism. In 1977, when a skeptical audience member probed for a creator in his godless, subtle worlds, he'd dismissed the notion outright. Eternal realms, no origin, no divine hand. But now, facing his own mortality at 73, doubts eroded his certainties. He yielded to the priest's urging, baptism, repentance, as shadows of illness loomed. Stepping into an Orthodox church for the first time, a dizzying vertigo seized him. He collapsed, striking his head severely, ambulances wailing in the echo. Yet, against all expectation, vitality returned. Weakness ebbed, life reaffirmed itself. The subtle world responded, he noted in a suppressed addendum, as if crossing a threshold unlocked a protective field. From then on, Veynik wove spiritual symbolism into his philosophy. Symbolic death as the psyche's initiation into hidden truths, archetypes of light piercing the veil of material illusion. His later seminars, held in whispers among trusted clairvoyants like Arthur Fort, explored how consciousness persists beyond the body. Saints communing directly with good spirits, the clairvoyant glimpsing evil's distortions. Veynik's measurements confirmed it. Around us swirled entities, their behaviors as predictable as electromagnetic waves, influencing our thoughts and fates. Yet, in the quiet hours of reflection, Veynik pondered an even more unsettling extension. What if consciousness after death isn't oblivion, but a fragmented echo trapped in chronal loops? Imagine souls, unmoored from flesh, replaying life's unresolved tensions in subtle realms, their awareness splintered like light through a prism, forever seeking reunion with the positive fields of divine order. This speculation, drawn from his unpublished chronal data, aligned seamlessly with his evolving view. Death as not an end, but a reconfiguration of the self amid warring energies. As Viktor Veynik's story fades into the archives, one question lingers in the silence. If the subtle world is real, and our consciousness merely a visitor there, what hidden forces are we truly serving in this life? Viktor distorted audio of a man's voice reciting fragmented notes. In the shadowed archives of the Soviet Union, a forbidden cassette lay buried for decades. Erased from official records, its contents deemed too dangerous for the materialist doctrine of the state. This is the lost recording of Viktor Veynik, a pioneering neuroscientist whose clandestine inquiries into the frontiers of consciousness challenged the very foundations of reality. What he uncovered about death was never meant to be heard. #Meta. Sex 1.5. Moscow's gray spires in the 1970s, overlaid with flickering blueprints of brain scans and esoteric symbols. Viktor Veynik was no ordinary researcher. Born in the late 1920s, he rose through the ranks of Soviet academia in the turbulent years from 1969 to 1992, a period when parapsychology seminars whispered in hospital basements and the afterlife was dismissed as bourgeois superstition. As head of experimental neurology at a secretive Moscow institute, Veynik probed the edges of human perception under the guise of studying cardiac arrest and coma states. But his true obsession, detailed in suppressed manuscripts smuggled out after his death, was the hidden architecture of the mind beyond the physical. Why was this material overlooked? In an era of ideological purges, Veynik's work blurred the line between science and mysticism, drawing the ire of party overseers who buried his findings to prevent counter-revolutionary contamination of dialectical materialism. Interviews with clairvoyants, unpublished EEG data from near-death survivors, these became ghosts in locked vaults, only resurfacing in the chaotic thaw of perestroika. Meta, Sex, 1.5. Shadows playing on walls lined with forbidden books. Slow zoom on a reconstructed tape recorder. At the heart of Veynik's revelations lay a core discovery, pieced together from his covert collaborations and personal reflections. Consciousness does not extinguish with the body, but persists in a transformed state, echoing ancient intuitions now backed by empirical shadows. Veynik's breakthrough came through his analysis of cases like that of the renowned clairvoyant Arthur Fort, whose 1971 clinical death experience Veynik dissected in a hidden transcript from 1972, smuggled notes that reframed Fort's visions as neurological archetypes of transcendence. Fort, plagued by lifelong heart ailments from his own excesses, had collapsed in a New York hospital, his relatives summoned for what doctors predicted would be his final night. Yet, as monitors flatlined, Fort crossed a threshold. Revived against the odds, he described detaching from his form, hovering above the bed in painless curiosity, unbound by time or fatigue. Veynik, poring over translated accounts in his Moscow lab, saw not delusion, but a blueprint. The dissolution of the physical shell into what he termed the beta matrix, an enduring substrate of self, invisible to our crude senses, yet fundamental to awareness. Ethers 15.9, intercut with brainwave graphs spiking erratically. Delving deeper, Veynik expanded this into a philosophical framework that gripped his seminars like a fever dream. He argued that death is no rupture but a symbolic unveiling, stripping away the archetypes of earthly suffering to reveal inner worlds where the psyche reigns unbound. Drawing from Fort's impressions, Veynik reconstructed the journey, a glide through timeless emptiness where the self endures sans flesh, encountering spectral kin reshaped by choice. Those long-forgotten souls, young again or matured beyond loss, recognized not by visage but by an innate resonance, a subtle clairvoyance inherent to the beta matrix. Veynik's psychological intrigue deepened here. He posited that our terror of death stems from over-reliance on the five senses, blinding us to the persona's subtle faculties, empathic knowing, temporal fluidity that activate fully in transition. In suppressed hospital logs from 1980s experiments, he documented patients echoing Fort. No fear on the precipice, only intrigue for the what's next. Veynik himself wrestled with these truths, his manuscripts confessing doubts about reality's fabric. Was the afterlife a collective unconscious, a hidden dimension our brains tune into during extremis? This tension haunted him, fueling late-night reflections on how suppressed knowledge like Fort's could rewrite human ontology, if only the regime hadn't chained it in secrecy. 1.5 years after Fort's physical passing, in January 1971, at age 73, Veynik claimed indirect continuations through mediated contacts, echoes reported by fellow researchers in 1985, aligning with his own data. Fort, liberated at last, described reunion with departed parents in a vast hall of life's replay, a karmic audit that explained his earthly weariness toward his gifts. Then, repose by a serene lakeside, acclimating to a beta form he willed to 45 years, vibrant, ageless. Veynik corroborated this with cross-references to Edward Riddle's assertions. Even Earth's savants grasp little of the visible-invisible weave. There, relatives greet in chosen guises, aging a mere illusion discarded like old skin. Veynik's forbidden archive amplified this, framing it as evidence that consciousness selects its vessel, defying entropy's grip. Sex 1.5. Overlay fades to handwritten journal pages, ink blurring like dissolving boundaries. Yet Veynik ventured further in his overlooked appendices, speculating on a facet untouched in prior accounts. The beta matrix as a resonant field, where post-death consciousness might entwine like quantum echoes, allowing fragmented dialogues across veils, not as ghosts, but as persistent waves rippling through the collective mind, hinting that our unlived potentials linger, awaiting reunion in eternity's lattice. Screen darkens to a single flickering candle, narrator's voice lowering to a whisper. In the end, Viktor Veynik left us questioning. If death unmasks the true self, what hidden archives of the soul have we yet to unearth, and at what cost to our illusions of finality? Dimly lit archive room, flickering microfilm reels, time-stamped documents stamped Classified, USSR Intelligence, 1978. A narrator's voice emerges, grave and measured, as shadows play across faded photographs of a stern-faced man in a lab coat. In the veiled corridors of Soviet secrecy, where science dared to probe the unseen, a cache of suppressed recordings from 1972 has finally escaped the iron grip of censorship. These are the lost seminars of Dr. Viktor Veynik, the pioneering neuroscientist whose unpublished manuscripts on consciousness challenged the very fabric of reality. Hidden away in state vaults after his untimely dismissal, they reveal not just data, but a forbidden dialogue with the beyond, transcripts of clairvoyant Arthur Fort, whose visions pierced the veil of death. What Veynik documented could unravel everything we know about the mind after mortality. But why was this buried? And what truths did it threaten? Cut to grainy black and white footage of a dimly lit seminar hall in Moscow, 1975. Shadows of attendees hunch over notebooks. Veynik, mid-40s, paces with quiet intensity, a chalkboard behind him etched with diagrams of neural pathways merging into ethereal waves. Dr. Viktor Veynik was no ordinary scientist. From 1969 through the crumbling years of the USSR until 1992, he led clandestine seminars in hospitals and hidden lecture halls, blending rigorous neuroscience with the uncharted territories of psychic phenomena. Dismissed by the Academy as a heretic, his work was deemed dangerous, too close to the spiritual undercurrents the regime sought to stamp out. Overlooked amid the chaos of perestroika, these tapes gathered dust, their contents a bridge between empirical doubt and otherworldly insight. Veynik, haunted by philosophical questions of consciousness persisting beyond the brain, turned to Arthur Fort, a clairvoyant whose hospital visions during the Brezhnev era offered raw, unfiltered glimpses into what lies after. It was Fort's revelations, filtered through Veynik's skeptical lens, that formed the core of this suppressed archive, a testament to a mind unbound by time. Slow zoom on a reel-to-reel recorder whirring to life, audio crackling as if from a hidden transcript. Echoes of Veynik's voice prompt Fort. Then Fort's words dissolve into vivid, imagined visuals, ethereal figures emerging from mist, ageless and luminous. At the heart of these forbidden recordings lies a core revelation, one that Veynik wrestled with in his notes. The illusion of physical decay unravels entirely upon crossing the threshold of death. Arthur Fort, in trance states documented by Veynik during 1970s hospital sessions, described the beta structure of existence, not bound by cellular breakdown, but a timeless framework where aging is obsolete. No cells, no entropy, no inexorable march toward frailty. In Veynik's reconstructed transcript, Fort recounts communing with souls from epochs long vanished, figures from before the great floods of antiquity, and those from the industrial shadows of later centuries. To him, they all manifested in the vigor of midlife, untouched by the ravages of time. They spoke of death as an unknown stranger, Veynik jotted in the margins, his scientific precision yielding to awe. These entities, Fort insisted, reclaim the prime of their earthly vitality upon arrival, sloughing off the husk of old age like a discarded shell. Even those who withered in their final mortal breaths, reborn in the bloom of youth, their forms radiating an eternal beauty that defies decay. Psychological diagrams dissolving into dreamlike sequences, grandmothers with radiant, unlined faces embracing wide-eyed grandsons, clocks melting into infinite loops, symbolizing timelessness. Veynik's handwritten annotations flash on screen, questioning, if consciousness endures without temporal anchors, what anchors reality itself? Veynik's seminars delved deeper, transforming Fort's visions into a psychological odyssey that gnawed at the edges of existential dread. Here, death emerges not as oblivion, but as a profound rebirth into one's authentic essence, a psychological unveiling where the soul sheds the distortions of earthly wear. Fort elaborated under Veynik's probing. In this spiritual realm, time dissolves, leaving only perpetual renewal. The souls he encountered echoed this truth, their communications a chorus affirming that at the moment of transition, vitality surges anew, unburdened by the body's betrayal. Relatives await, not as frail echoes of memory, but as embodiments of their innermost truth, guides facilitating entry into this other world. A grandmother, once gaunt and bent by decades, now gleams with the vitality that mirrors her core spirit, her face a canvas of unmarred wisdom. Veynik, ever the philosopher-scientist, expanded on this in his suppressed drafts, pondering the implications for consciousness. If the mind reconstructs itself beyond neural limits, then death becomes a gateway to archetype, where the psyche confronts its symbolic immortality. His doubts surfaced in fevered annotations. Could this be collective hallucination, or a hidden dimension of the brain's untapped potential? The intrigue deepened, pulling listeners into a web of psychological tension. What if our fears of aging mask a deeper terror of eternal self-revelation? Contemplative close-up of Veynik's photograph, overlaid with speculative neural maps pulsing like afterimages. Soft, ambient hum underscores the narration, evoking introspection. Yet Veynik's archive hints at even wilder frontiers, ones he speculated on in private reflections, not captured in the seminars, but aligned with his quest for consciousness's secrets. What if, after death, the mind doesn't merely persist, but integrates into a vast, interconnected field, a quantum echo where individual awareness merges with ancestral streams, allowing glimpses of unlived possibilities? This uncharted idea, thematically woven into Fort's visions, suggests a consciousness that evolves, not ends, challenging Veynik's own materialist foundations with whispers of infinite continuity. Final image lingers on a sealed envelope marked Veynik Files, Destroyed by Order, as the narrator's voice trails into silence. In reclaiming these hidden transcripts, we stand at the precipice. If death restores us to our truest form, what hidden parts of ourselves have we buried alive?